everybody, I am Jared Ross, a Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another video where I review your DNA and genealogy questions. As always, if you have a question you'd like me to answer, be sure to go to my subreddit, r/GenieVlogger, and put your questions there. I know I say this in every video, it is a very long queue of questions. It's hard for me to get through them. This is why I do this series, because people used to email me and it was literally impossible to be able to get back to everyone. So this at least gives me a chance to answer questions, help everybody out, and basically give back to the community. But let's go ahead and jump right in. Where is my French DNA? My maternal grandfather is French-Canadian on both sides of his family. I have DNA matches to both sides also, but hardly any French DNA. I'm 14% England in Northwestern Europe, 27% Scotland. My maternal grandmother is from Northern England and has British and Scottish on both sides. My paternal grandparents are both from Ireland and I'm 59% Irish. I will send a copy of my DNA results from Ancestry, which I know that they put in another post, so we'll go to that. So here we see the breakdown: 59% Ireland, 27% Scotland, 14% England and Northwestern Europe. The second image is giving us communities, so Southwestern Quebec, New York, and Vermont French settlers, and then more communities, Munster Island. So based on what this person said, it certainly makes sense, because I think they had said, so the maternal grandfather is French-Canadian, so we'd be expecting about 25%, assuming that French-Canadian gives only French ancestry. And then parents on the paternal side are both Irish, so basically expecting Irish and whatever. And then the maternal grandmother is Northern England, British, and Scottish. So basically we're looking at a massive hodgepodge of Northwestern European, as usual. And so basically, well, where is the French? It's hiding in this big hodgepodge of Ireland, Scotland, England, and Northwestern Europe. But the main thing to focus on is the fact that they did see that you have a very consistent connection to many people that have Southwestern Quebec, New York, and Vermont French settlers, which sounds like what you said. So it even says 2 possible ancestor stories found connected to your regions, England and Northwestern Europe and Scotland. So the answer here is really just that simple. It's hiding somewhere in that mixture of DNA, because of the complications of population migrations and the relation of all the different populations within France and England and Scotland and Ireland and all of that. It's just really, really hard to decipher. And so if you take a test somewhere other than Ancestry, it's very possible that you're going to get a very different Northwestern European mix. It might include French readings. It'll just depend on how that company defines it. But one thing that you can do is when you look at this photo, you can see that Northwestern European, England, what do they define it yet? England and Northwestern European. Well, a good amount of that is jumping right there into Belgium and France. So, you know, that is including some of that French. And even though it's not like covering all of France, it's not necessarily that only those people in that small pocket of France and Belgium are going to have that same DNA. It's just that that's where a very large percentage of it is. If you trace your French ancestry and find out what parts of France most of those families came from, it's very possible that they might be coming from some areas near that. So, you know, northern sort of France. But of course, it may be some other part of France that they hail from as well. On to the next one. Married set of brick walls. First brick wall that I had hit in this family was my great-grandmother, as we thought that she had been an only child. Turned out that she had had a half-sister through her mother. Her husband and great-grandmother's father was my 3 times great-grandparents' son, whom she divorced. Both my great-grandmother and her half-sister went by the shortened version of their name, and both had the same middle name, but spelled slightly different. Maggie May / May, ours was with the May, M-A-E. The following is the tree, including my Maggie, starting with the brick walls. John C. Burgess, that seems to be the person who's the father of both of them. And here we get the information: born 1821, died 1904, immigrated from England to Kansas. Here married Mary Snelling, and then we have all of their children who were born from 1853 all the way up to 1869. And then we see this second one coming from a second marriage. It looks like they were actually married, so 1885. And then the birth of this daughter, 1887. And so I guess the brick wall is getting past James Burgess's family. Now, unfortunately, I'm really confused about what is going on. A big part of it being this sentence: her husband and great grandmother's father was my 3 times grandparent's son whom she divorced. So I am absolutely confused as to what you mean, how you're related to whatever. And then in this list, you only list the one person, but you say that they share the same mother, but then these lists of children share the same father. So there's something going on here that I think you might have mentioned, I don't know, but I don't understand what you're saying. So I'm not quite sure how to help you. But one thing that I will mention that maybe will help you, cross my fingers, is I noticed that you're dealing with a lot of people that were from England and then came to Kansas. So especially this John C. Burgess's family. So you even mentioned for this William Burgess, found out that he naturalized but can't locate the document. So one thing that you can do for naturalization records, especially because a lot of people will mostly focus on going to Ancestry or Family Search and searching there, which is great, but you should also look into the records from the USCIS. So we're going to go over their webpage. So here's the USCIS, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. And they have a whole series of documents related to naturalizations. And what you can do is request records from them, and these records can be immensely helpful. Now, one thing I will say about this program, it is quite annoying. A lot of genealogists have a major issue with it, especially because they recently tried to up their prices for the fees, and I can't remember what happened, but there were like laws that knocked it down, and it's been a whole thing. And if I remember correctly, I think that there may be lawsuits against them because what they're doing is actually illegal based on the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA, which is funny because they actually have a whole section on their website about it. Either way, these are very important records, and looking at this page, what you do is you can click searching the index and it explains what you need to do, because you're not going to be able to search it yourself. You have to get them to search it for you, which is a fee unto itself. And then once they get that information, then you can request for records. So first you submit an index search and you put in all this information. They go into it. I'm not going to do it right now, but you do an index search, and then once you can find where the records are, you can then request records. And so here it gives you details on different records that you can get. So a big one are the C files. Those are like really, really good, and they span a good amount of years. So 1906 to 1956. So just to get an idea of what a C file might look like, you're going to get photos, you'll get all sorts of different information, and it can sometimes give more information about the family's ancestry. So if you are having a hard time finding naturalizations, this could be a way to go about it. On to the next one. Family mystery. Hey genealogists, in my family lives a long mystery of a certain person. This person was most likely alive end 19th century, beginning 20th century. The family story is that a probably Spanish man who worked as a server for a Spanish landlord met a Dutch woman and got a child. How this child went to the Netherlands and what happened to the parents, no clue. I do know the name of the child, my great-grandmother. So if the child is the great-grandmother, then this is the poster's second great-grandfather, who's the Spanish man. I'm Dutch, born in the Netherlands, and although the Netherlands know how to preserve their records, I couldn't find the names of her parents. I've tried multiple DNA testing companies on multiple family members who all got a different idea of what the ancestry of the Spanish mister could be. My heritage, with a large amount of Greek and Southern Italian, 23andMe with smaller amounts of North African, Arabian, and Italian. After telling my grandmother about these estimated ethnicities, she thought the most about the Greek. She saw a possibility there because of the unrecognized Christian genocide of Greeks in that region. She thought that maybe he fled to Spain and then became a server by a landlord. I've also tried to make a tree on Ancestry, but from that particular side, I can't go further than my great-grandmother and her spouse, his name. This is bothering me for years, and I keep testing family members, but without result. Can you help me? So this is going to be a difficult one, but it's not too difficult to answer. The reason it's going to be difficult is it's going to take a lot of legwork on your end, but it is possible, especially because you've had so many family members test. What the trick is don't focus on the admixture. Don't focus on those percentages. Those will only maybe give you an idea, but they're not really going to help you in the genealogy research. So coming up with these ideas of like, well, there's this small percentage of Greek, so maybe it's this Greek genocide. Yeah, maybe it is, but it could be something completely different. And until you start tracing and figuring it out, you're not going to know. So the way to figure it out is take all of these relatives from the same side. So you're talking about your great grandmother. So you need to get all of the relatives that descend from your great grandmother, or if she has any half siblings and they have living descendants who've tested, you'll want to use those as well. And basically what you do is you take all of the descendants that are descendants of your great grandmother and you look and find all of the genetic matches that they're all matching. And basically, all of these matches that you find all of these cousins matching are very likely going to be through this shared related side. And one of the beautiful things is because you've tested MyHeritage and 23andMe, when you actually look at how these matches are all related, you'll actually get to see how much DNA they share with each other as well. So you'll actually be able to kind of figure different things out. It's really going to come down to trying to figure out these genetic matches that are common in each one of these DNA tests. So like starting on 23andMe, go through each one of the DNA tests of your family members from that side and look at their genetic matches and try to find what are the shared genetic matches and note which ones those are. Some other methods that you can do to help you in figuring that out, which I'm not going to go into detail, but if you look them up, they will tell you how to do it. One of those methods is the leads method. And by using the leads method, you can help divvy up your genetic matches to figure out which sides of your family they're likely coming from. And then you can use that to further help you in figuring out this great grandmother's side. One other thing you can do is what's also known as a auto cluster, which actually MyHeritage has is something that you can do. You can do an auto cluster with them, and that just takes your matches and then makes a visual representation of all the different matches in how they're related, and it basically breaks it down to these big square blocks where you can kind of tell like, okay, each one of these square blocks, they all have some sort of genetic relation to each other. So it's not going to be easy, but with enough legwork, as you look further into these matches and you start to build out their trees, then you might be able to figure it out. So let's say you identify a handful of matches that are all matching all of these cousins from your great grandmother's side. What you do is then start building their trees and especially trying to find, are any of these matches related to each other? Because if they're related to each other, whatever relation they have, it's through that commonality that will be the connection to your side. So you already have figured out that these cousins are through your great grandparents' side, your great grandmother specifically. Well, now maybe you might be able to figure out like, oh, well, I actually see that this one match and this other match, they descend from this other great grandparent that was living around the same time. And so you're going to want to start looking at, okay, well, how is there a possible connection between these two? And then as you build out those family trees, maybe that great grandparent of those two matches, you start to build out their tree. And then all of a sudden you find out that, oh, well, they actually had a sibling or an uncle or someone where they had gone from Spain or Greece or something like that and then had gone to the Netherlands. Or, you know, you find some connection between this family and the Netherlands. But even if you don't find the exact connection, you might be able to get an idea of where this man came from, because if you look at all of these cousins and you start to find that all of these genetic matches that you find commonly with all the cousins from this great grandmother's side all have these specific areas that they list in their family trees, it might be that that specific area that's in all of these different family trees of these matches is the area where this mystery man actually came from. Hopefully that makes sense. On to the next one. Ancestry side view. What do you think? This question is for both Jared and the community. What do you think about Ancestry's new side view feature? If you have one or both of your parents tested, how accurate is it? Where do you see its greatest use for genetic genealogy and building your tree, and what do you think are possible downfalls of side view or things to be aware of? How exactly can one get the greatest use out of it, and where do you see this feature going in the future? To start out, I think side view is great. It is absolutely awesome that they've been working further to try to figure out how to divvy up the DNA based on parental sides, because that's not an easy thing to do. So the question of how accurate is it, I really don't know. From my own experiences with the DNA tests I've looked at on Ancestry, as well as some of the results I've seen people post around, I think it's decently accurate, but obviously runs into a lot of these same issues we have with just these typical percentage tests anyway, because they're not going to be able to tell exactly, but they can get a good idea. So I'd have to see, like, I'd want to see white papers behind it, which I don't know if they've released one on the side view yet, but it'd be interesting to see what type of percentages they have if they've done any sort of statistical analysis about it. The greatest use for it really is going to be in the people that are looking for biological family that have some sort of misattributed parental event. So basically people who are adoptees or people who have an unknown grandparent or unknown parent, or, you know, for whatever reason you don't know some part of your ancestry. I think this is where it's going to help you out the most, but most specifically when people don't know either one of their parents or both of their parents. So I think it's going to be more useful, especially for people that have a very mixed background. So like if you have two parents where they're both some Northwestern European mix, I don't think it's going to be that great. The side view, it might be helpful if maybe, you know, one of the European mixes, you know, your mom has some really strong Eastern European ancestry and you can kind of figure that out by looking. Now, some obvious downfalls are the same thing that's a downfall with the percentages in general, and that people may look at this, take it as complete fact, and just be like, this is how it is. And then when things get updated, they're going to be like, all like, oh my gosh. So it's not the worst downfall necessarily, but I think that's really what you're just going to run into is people misinterpreting it, not understanding it, and basically overly putting their faith into it. And how exactly can one get the greatest use out of it? I'm not quite sure of the greatest way someone can get a use out of it. I think for anyone who's already kind of built your family tree and stuff, it's not going to be super useful. I think its greatest use will mainly be if you have some sort of weird percentage popping up in your percentages that you're not quite sure, is it through your mom's side, is it through your dad's side? And then when you look at the side view, you might notice, oh, okay, well, I see it lumped up with this stuff, which I usually think of as my paternal side, so maybe that's through my paternal side. I think that's going to be the greatest use of it for people that aren't looking into the misattributed parental stuff. What I'd hope for in the future, and this kind of goes along with, they actually just rolled out a chromosome painter, is that they start increasing more of that stuff and they start to kind of have tools connect with each other. So you can actually connect that tool then maybe with your family tree and maybe connect it with the DNA painter. Maybe even start going from not just side views, but doing breakdowns even further where maybe you can break it down by your grandparents or something. Not exactly sure if that kind of stuff is even possible with it, but I think it would be really interesting to see where it goes. And this is basically a auto phasing. Phasing is just where you take your DNA and then you have one of your parents test. You take their DNA and you then basically line everything up. So you know which is coming from which parent. So basically just think of it, every spot in your DNA, you have two alleles. You either have an A, C, T, or G. One of those alleles came from mom, one came from dad. They need to figure out which one's coming from which. What phasing does is it figures out, well, if there's an A and a T, A's coming from mom, T's coming from dad. And that's kind of what it figures out. And so this is just trying to figure that out automatically without already having your parents tested. So as a quick example here, we have Mr. Beats' DNA ancestry, and this is what his side view looks like. And we can see that it does a decent breakdown of everything. And the main things that we're looking at is we see that we have on one side this purple and this darker purple, so that's Norway and Ireland, so that would be coming from one parent, which from what we know from Mr. Beats' family, I believe that was coming from his paternal side, that he had Irish ancestry on that side. So because we know that that Irish ancestry is on the paternal side, we can make the inference that parent 2 is the paternal side, parent 1 is the maternal side. But like I said before, when you have someone that has mostly like Northwestern European ancestry, it's a lot of the same stuff. A lot of this England and Northwestern Europe, a lot of this Germanic Europe, both have a little bit of that Sweden and Denmark, and then we get France on one side, and then the Norway and Ireland on the other side. So if we were to use this to try to figure out which parent's which, the thing that would help us is, okay, well, is there one parent that has the French on one side, and then one that has the Norway and Ireland on the other side, or is maybe something else going on? Because it is possible that this is wrong. But then going down, we also see that it gives us a percentage breakdown from one parent to the other, then added up to you. And so here, to give another example, we have Matt Baker from Useful Charts, and this we have a much bigger dichotomy. So we see that we have some Basque, we have France, we have Wales, and then once we get into Scotland, that's where we get both. So on both sides, there's Scottish, Norway, Sweden and Denmark, Ireland, England and Northwestern Europe, Germanic Europe, etc. But here's the thing. For the French, let's take all of that off. We're going to put all And then French. Okay. So for the French, it's only listed on one side for Matt Baker, but we know from his ancestry that we have French ancestors on both sides. So something weird is going on here. Either they're misreading it and they aren't realizing that there is French on both sides, or it's part of the difficulty of just reading things, and a lot of the French from one side is getting lumped in maybe with the Germanic Europe or something. So there's a lot of possibilities that could be going on for why that's happening, but if we were to take this as fact and say, okay, well, we're only going to find French on one side of his family, well, that's not the case. We're going to trace out his family tree, and then we're going to find, oh, wow, yeah, he's got French ancestors on both sides. But then on both sides, those French ancestors are from the Alsace-Lorraine area, where there's probably a lot of Germanic genetic connection, because Alsace-Lorraine has been one of those areas where that border has jumped back and forth like crazy. All these big complications going on with it. So it's certainly a really cool tool. It's really fun. It certainly does add another tool in the belt, but just like the typical ethnicity percentages, it isn't something that should be taken at face value. And hopefully as time goes on, we'll get better and better. Now, for anyone wondering, how do I have access to the DNA results for Matt Baker and Mr. Beat? Well, the reason is because I've actually traced out their family trees, and that's why I know so much about them. And if you'd like to learn more about their family trees and to see me actually use the DNA in tracing their trees, especially in the case of Mr. Beat, be sure to check out this playlist right here. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. It really does help me out. You can also click right about here if you'd like to subscribe. It's completely free to do so. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GenieVlogger. I'm the Genie Vlogger. See you in my next video.